I am a massive Diablo 3 fan. I played almost every season in Reaper of Souls and even farmed out my cosmic wings. While waiting for Diablo 4 to become a real thing, Diablo 2 Resurrected dropped. A chance for players to revisit what many would say is the best Diablo game of all time. And this sparked debate online. Should Diablo 4 be more like the action-packed arcade style of Diablo 3? Or should it align with the grindy, gritty, hardcore feel of Diablo 2? This is a question that even the developers never quite found an answer to. My name is Zenny and this is a series in which I take retrospective deep dives into video games, the good, bad and ugly. So please join me as we take one last look at Diablo 4. I already gave a bit of my history with Diablo, but to clarify, I've been playing Diablo 4 from the beta all the way up to present day. I've max leveled every class, killed every uber boss, and overall I have enjoyed my time with the game. With that being said, identity crisis is the most accurate choice of words I can use to describe this game at launch. Players were screaming for more Diablo 2, and the developers even acknowledged that this latest entry was going to be more closely aligned with it, and yet we ended up in this strange limbo. D2 fans wanted meaningful itemization, power progression tied to loot rather than a seasonal system, a dark gritty feel, and a strong endgame that didn't rely on a modern live service approach. In a way, from the outside looking in, the game was gearing up to be a lot like Diablo 2, it just didn't play out like that. On the contrary, Diablo 3 fans were looking for that fast, fluid combat where everything sort of just blows up, clear progression and build paths with things like sets, fast, snappy growth and fun engaging systems like rifts. To this point, Diablo 4 met almost none of the criteria. Instead, everything was slowed down. However, the problem was that the lack of velocity from D3 wasn't replaced with any meaningful type of depth. In essence, nothing particularly changed. Gear was still simple and builds lacked real customization. Take a look at the skill tree for example. At first glance the tree looks quite complex and I believe that to be by design to hide the fact that it isn't. Within this tree there is always a correct choice for your build. There is no experimentation or room for debate. If you wish to play at X build you must allocate your points here, else you're putting yourself at a major disadvantage. It's all very cut and dry while creating the illusion that it isn't, again landing somewhere in between Diablo 2 and 3. The developers very quickly understood they had to address pacing issues amongst others, because players on both sides were not happy. At a foundational level, the open world design played a monumental part in this. The open world nature of Diablo 4 was marketed as this revolutionary breakaway from the traditional series format, and it had many players quite excited. And I'll give credit, very early on it did feel refreshing to actually explore these expansive lands, but bigger issues soon crept in. With so much distance between everything, backtracking became an annoyance, gameplay was interrupted by mounting and dismounting constantly, and players often started to ignore map-wide events because they couldn't be bothered to run there. It wasn't the Diablo 2 focused zones or the Diablo 3 efficient levels, it was just big. I'd like to shout out anyone who leveled to max during launch by the way, because you'll remember how painful that experience was, no pun intended. I don't quite remember how long it really took to hit 100, but I found this old article in which D4 devs claimed it would take upwards of 150 hours on average. A grind that long only works if there's something waiting for you at the end, and there just wasn't. On that point, let's talk about the equipment. In Diablo 2, dropping one singular item could completely impact a player's build, whereas in D3, through the set system, often you need to commit a large portion of your equipment to a build in advance. But the system did work in getting casual players online and doing endgame content fast. Meanwhile, Diablo 4 was always in a weird place in this sense. I believe they tried to achieve the old school feel with the ancestral and mythic unique items. Each of these item tiers are harder to acquire than the standard run-of-the-mill legendaries, but come with an inbuilt affix that tends to greatly alter or power up the way one of your skills work. A modern day example, here's a new ancestral for the paladin which gives you a chance to spawn a blessed hammer each time you hit an enemy. Pretty cool. The problem in today's gaming ecosphere however is that with all of the tools at our fingertips, the community has pretty much figured out the strongest items before a season even goes live. To quickly tie this point up in a nice bow, Diablo 4 tried to recreate Diablo 2 magic, but in the modern day ecosystem, and that magic just doesn't survive data mining, guides, PTR, and methods to guarantee your drops. I should also mention that in the process of attributing these cool effects to Ancestral and Mythics, regular legendaries were, for the most part, relegated to stat boxes. Quite often their effects will be gain X stat while in combat or increase armor each time you hit an enemy. While their use was and is still important, they were nothing to be excited about. Finally, Mythics. Now these are incredibly cool. An extremely low drop chance to get an item that is essentially good regardless of your class or build. One small issue though. Back in the early days, the odds of getting one of these before you completed the season was extremely unfavourable, and chances are, if you were a player that did grind to get your hands on one, you definitely didn't need it by that point. But happy days to anyone that got lucky. But yeah, all of these issues funneled into the same place, the end game. This has came up a couple of times, and in my opinion it's probably one of the most improved areas of Diablo 4, and it's still planned to be further addressed. Not gonna sugarcoat it, the game was terrible at launch in this area. You could go do Nightmare Dungeons, which felt like a slower iteration of D3 Rifts, or you could go do Helltides. Yep, that was pretty much it. Okay, sure, world bosses too, like once a day if you want to include that. Meanwhile, here's some of the activities you can do right now in Season 11. Helltides, Nightmare Dungeons, The Pit, Infernal Hordes, Undercity, Lair bosses, Dark Citadel, and world bosses. And that's without mention of the existing systems like Nightmare Dungeons having been reworked to feel much more dynamic and actually worth your time. Most of these activities have an inherent purpose now. In a similar vein, in-game systems like gear progression used to be very tedious and strangely staggered, whereas today, along with the quality of life changes and reworked mechanics, brand new systems were implemented. Two big examples, Masterworking gear in Season 4 and Sanctification from this latest Season 11. Both of these features would allow a player to take their existing gear to new heights, bringing about increased stat potential, and in the case of the new Sanctification mechanic, you can straight up get mythic abilities imprinted on your gear if you're lucky. Insane. While all of this is positive without a doubt, and despite having so much more content to engage with, we do still run into the problem of becoming so strong there isn't much need to push further beyond your personal interest. And a lot of this comes down to how Blizzard thinks about player power. In the early days, everything was met with tweaks to make things easier, from Uber Lilith to XP gain and so on. Then, feeling they were maybe straying away from how tough they wanted things to be, or fearing player power, some things were then reverted and buffed back up, other things were nerfed, and it became this vicious cycle of over and under correction. The game wasn't stable. One patch would feel great leveling, but then the endgame bosses would be ridiculous unless you could one-shot them. Then in another patch everything felt slow again, but the challenge disappeared. In my personal opinion, Diablo 4 didn't struggle to balance the numbers, it struggled to decide whether players were allowed to feel strong. More recently, it looks like Diablo wants to solidify itself as the accessible ARPG in which a casual player can hop on, have fun and say GG until the next season. And that's completely fine. This is where Diablo 3 ended up. It's unfortunate that it seemingly has took so long for them to resign to this position, and that confusion is what I think caused a lot of the growing pains. Finally, the last topic of this section, the live service model and microtransactions. Right, well, let's start with microtransactions because I assume you either don't care or you're on the exact same page. If we buy a AAA price tag game with expansions and a battle pass, do we really still need an in-game cosmetic shop? If Diablo 4 was free to play, sure, do what you want, you gotta make your money somehow, but it's just not. Some of you may argue that, well, if the game is a live service, Blizzard need that steady stream of income to support the game, but again, they just don't, and it's hurt their reputation. It's another example of Diablo 4 not knowing whether it's a premium product or a live service platform, and that confusion shows up everywhere else in the game. Right, but enough of that, let's talk about the live service seasonal model. There's an inherent gift and curse that comes along with live service games. Returning viewers of the channel likely know all too well about this from the modern Monster Hunter series. The advantage of this model is that you get to see the game gradually improve, progress and build on existing systems over the course of multiple years. The disadvantage is that more often than not, the product at launch isn't great. It may not be bad per se, but they often aren't revolutionary and go through quite a few teething troubles. The product we end up with years later does often end up surpassing what it otherwise could be, but at the steep cost of being mediocre for a while. Diablo 4 is the penultimate example of this. If you haven't played D4 since Season 1, 2 or 3, jumping into Season 11 will feel like a completely different game because there's been so many of these compounding changes and updates steadily working to improve the base product. Those of you who have been stomaching season on season since the beginning will likely feel very different. While the game is objectively better in almost all aspects since launch, when you experience the changes incrementally and you've witnessed the developer rollercoaster of attempting to balance the whole thing, it's much more difficult to acknowledge just how far we've came. And all of this ties into the very difficult position Diablo 4 developers were put in. I'm not here to justify or convince you that it's okay we've had to wait 2 years for the game to be good, but it's only fair to at least acknowledge the other side. Blizzard had to please both the very different Diablo 2 and 3 fans while meeting monetization and live service aspects pushed by Activision, and to do that in a very vicious landscape in which Blizzard was under heavy negative scrutiny. Yeah, that sounds horrible. It sucks for us, the gamers, but of course the game failed to meet expectations. Diablo 4 was going to be divisive no matter what in my personal opinion, but rather than focus in one direction or another, they went right down the middle and it didn't work. But where are we now and should you give the game a try? It's been referenced in a couple sections, but yeah, Diablo 4 as of time of recording in Season 11 is absolutely worth your time. Whether you're looking to jump back in after a long break, or if you're a new player wanting to try the ARPG genre, now is the best time. Leveling is fast and efficient, progression makes sense, builds are straightforward to get online, and there's a bunch of endgame activities for you to engage with. In fact, a little behind the scenes insight for you, all the background gameplay you've been seeing was all recorded within 1 hour. That's how dynamic the game feels at the moment. Pre-ordering the latest expansion will give you access to the returning Paladin class, which is insanely fun. But don't worry, all classes are very viable and will get you to that OP level you want to reach. So my personal recommendation, hold off on pre-ordering the latest expansion. Try the base game, and if it feels better, consider buying the already launched Vessel of Hatred expansion. That way you can experience all the new stuff that came out with it. I am not going to recommend pre-ordering the upcoming expansion as it could go either way, so reserve your own judgment there. With that being said, if you're a Path of Exiles enjoyer, D4 likely isn't for you. The game is still missing the depth you're probably searching for. Instead, there's now much more focus on getting strong, fast, and blasting through various activities. It's kind of like what Arc Raiders did in the extraction shooter genre. Tarkov is great for those who enjoy it, but it was also a bit too hardcore for casual players or those looking to play in moderation. After all this time, Diablo 4 is finally finding its identity after failing to commit to one for so long. Season 11 is the healthiest our game has ever been, and it gets me excited for what's to come in the inbound expansion. But what do you think? Let me know your thoughts on this whole situation in the comment section. Are you a long time fan or new to the series? If you enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate if you would like and subscribe, and consider checking out the video on screen now where I reflected on Dragon's Dogma 2, a game that found itself in a very similar situation to this one. Thanks for watching.